Back on the right stand, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm joined by Professor Salvatore Babones. He's the Associate Professor, University of Sydney. Professor Babones, thank you very, very much for speaking with us. Your opinion piece on India at 75 through some very interesting observations, especially those about the independent democracy watchers who you believe perhaps owe India an apology. Why do you say so?
Well, my opinion piece is based on a research paper that's been published in Quadrant magazine and now republished on the print in India. The research paper is an examination of the three major democracy organizations: Freedom House in the United States, the Economic Intelligence Unit in the UK, and the Varieties of Democracy Institute in Sweden. In that research paper, I examine literally all of the reasons they give for India's troubling decline in democracy since 2018, and have found errors, inconsistencies, and I think outright misrepresentations in all of them.
What kind of inconsistencies did you find, and is it endemic to all the three democracy watchers?
All three ranking systems noted a dramatic decline in India's democracy ranking as keyed to the 2019 election, and claiming that democracy had severely deteriorated in India as a result or in line with the 2019 election. But when you actually look at the evidence they give for that, many of the specifics either predate 2014 even, or those specifics have no temporal connection to the 2019 election. But I'm much more concerned about the outright misrepresentations. I mean, for example, if you go into the footnotes of these democracy reports, you find the oft-cited statistic that more journalists are killed in India than in any other country in the world. Now, that's a terrible fact. But that's a terrible fact for a country that has a population of 1.4 billion and a free media. In fact, when you standardize those statistics by population, we find that India has an average of about 3.5 journalist killings per year. That's 3.5 too many. And the rest of the world outside China, for which there's no data, has an average of 6.3 billion per year. So in fact, journalists are safer in India than they are outside India. Now, that should be a positive factor. On top of that, saying that journalists killed doesn't tell us who killed them. Now, again, 3.5 journalists killed is too many under any circumstances, but there was no evidence to suggest that the government or government-linked entities work behind these deaths. There are similar misrepresentations in the UAPA record. Now, as an American, I teach in Australia, but I am an American, and I'm very opposed to emergency legislation of the kind that India has in the UAPA. It's not just India that has it. Canada has it. European Union has it. America does not. However, under the UAPA, there's been roughly a constant level of arrests made every year between 2014, when the data start, and 2021. That number's between 900 and 1,000 per year, roughly. There's no trend. But if you specifically seek to find a trend, you can find individual year pairs for which it goes up, but then the next year it goes down. So if you're intentionally trying to make Indian democracy look bad, you can cite those particular statistics without giving them any context in terms of the Maoist insurgency going on or the Kashmir situation, simply by giving the numbers. If you'll allow me, I can give you one more very striking example. One number that's constantly cited to show that India is no longer a democracy is the number of people who have sedition reports, FIRs, first indication reports, filed against them. And it is routinely reported in the international press as hundreds, thousands of people facing sedition charges. Now, of course, those are not charges. Anyone in India pretty much can file an FIR. The question is, are people actually being prosecuted? There seems to be no trend in prosecutions. The prosecutions are much lower in number. But go even deeper into the data, go into the footnotes of the report. You find out that the period over which sedition claims are being made, they say the decade 2010 to 2020. Now, as a quantitative social scientist, that was an immediate red flag for me. A decade, 10 years. That's either 2010 to 2019, if you want to call it the 2010s, or that's 2011 to 2020, if you want to consider it a proper decade. Why did they use specifically the 11 years, 2010 to 2020? Because those are the only period over which you can find a rise in the use of first indication reports of sedition. Choose any other period, and it's a decline.
Yeah.
So this kind of thing really makes me call into question the good faith with which these rankings have been compiled.
Is there any good faith or is there an agenda? And let me ask you, what did you find? Was this agenda against India as a country, or was this agenda against the BJP and more specifically against Prime Minister Narendra Modi, a popularly elected Prime Minister with a larger mandate the second time around?
I don't think these organizations are anti-Modi or anti-BJP, and they're certainly not anti-India. However, these organizations reflect the opinion of the intellectuals, of the experts, of the journalists, of the academics who report back to them. That is, these organizations don't collect their own information. They use information that's out in the public sphere, and they hire academics and journalists to write sections of their reports for them. So a report from one of these organizations may be 250 pages long. The India section is a couple of pages, and that's written on behalf of the organization by somebody. So I suspect what's happened is that these reports on India simply reflect the overall opinion of India's intellectual class, not just India's intellectual class, but the expat or NRI intellectual class who are concerned with Indian matters. Look, a professor at Harvard who studies India, who may be of Indian background, has much more influence on a report like this than an Indian author, in India who is not connected to international organizations. The report reflects the politics of those who are contributing to it, not necessarily any conspiracy by these organizations to downgrade India.
But isn't the onus of a background check rest on these organizations when they hire somebody?
I don't think the brief was to make India look bad. I think the brief was, go away and tell me what your expert conclusion is. Unfortunately, so many of the experts allow their own political viewpoints to influence their expert judgments. And that's something that's endemic throughout the social sciences and obviously throughout journalism as well. It takes a very dedicated journalist or social scientist to report something with which she or he disagrees and nonetheless report it straight without doing it grudgingly, without trying to manipulate it. It's very difficult to be an objective vessel for the truth instead of letting your own viewpoint sink in. And really, I think that's what's happened. We simply see the personal prejudices, people using these organizations as tools with which to fight their own domestic political battles.
True, but the other aspect is that don't these organizations have the responsibility to also do a deep dive and understand the nature of democracy in India? The fact that law and order is a state subject, and it could be just one or two states or two, three other, a few states pulling down the entire stature of the country because of what's happening in under their watch. So shouldn't that also be reflected?
I would encourage people to do detailed, dispassionate research. There's no point trying to label these kind of claims about India, label them some kind of anti-India conspiracy or anti-Modi or anti-BJP conspiracy, because anyone who says that will simply be written off as being themselves partisan. The way to do to the numbers, to go to the details, and not to repeat the errors the opposite way, not to try to make India look even better than it is. The answer is simply to produce research that provides an accurate image of India, which you may not always like. There are many. All of us have warts, and India, I'm sure, is no exception. But by producing detailed, substantiated research that does not cherry pick, that provides all the data, I think you can change the narrative by making it very clear to those who are in a position to be writing about India, to be speaking about India, to make it very clear to them, look, here are the actual data. Go to the website, find the real data, not just the opinion.
Professor Babones, thank you very, very much. Before we go across to our experts who are joining us from some of these countries where this kind of agenda setting against India tends to happen, let's try and quickly just summarize the big takeaways from his paper, where he's called out these democracy watchers, these organizations. Is there an open bias? Organizations publishing sensational downgradings. Why are they doing it? Organizations aware their ratings will be widely reported. These organizations pick the most damning facts to serve evaluations. Few incidents in a nation of 1.4 billion is being seen as an assault on democracy. And of course, lack of evidence shows negative rankings are disingenuous. So what's the agenda? And if they're doing it deliberately or they're doing it knowingly, then do they owe Bharat an apology? That's the question that we ask. Let's go across to our guests. Pandit Satish K. Sharma, Chair of the British Board of Dharmic Scholars with us. Anang Mittal, Political Analyst with us. And of course, Suresh Krishnamurthy ji, Board Member of Kohana, also with us. My namaste to everybody. Thank you very much. Let me ask, thank you very much. Pandit Satish ji, this agenda, we've spoken about this. So I'd like you to start, and then we'll go across to our friends from the US of A. Both Anang Mittal and Suresh ji are based out of America. So, Satish ji.
Well, firstly, I'd like to compliment Professor Babonas for his impartiality in producing his analysis. It's refreshing to see an impartial analysis coming from a member of the Western academic fraternity. And so I think we owe him a debt of gratitude. He pointed out one quite remarkable observation, which I want to also emphasize. Only a short while ago, we had this ridiculous thing from Reuters, who did a survey about statistics. And they had this survey and it said terrible things about Bharat. And then it was scrutinized. It was found to be a perception survey, i.e. they hadn't actually done a survey on the ground. What they had done is taken the opinions of experts, supposedly. Further drilling down, we established that the experts were in fact not experts at all, but people with their own agendas. And so in this new report that was published which downgraded Bharat, what I think we're seeing is it's not a statistically sound analysis, it's actually yet another perception analysis. And with regard to experts, remember, the Europeans are still looking for weapons of mass destruction. And this has helped us to highlight that there is a consistency between these bodies who assume the moral authority and the eligibility to actually perform this multivariant analysis. They have no credibility, they have no integrity, and as Professor Babonas' work has established, the quality of what they've produced is hugely suspect. From my own opinion, I think what they have produced is nothing other than mere atrocity literature, which has been produced for a long period of time.
Well, but then they get a certain level of credibility, and if they are doing this to India, how many other nations are they pursuing with an agenda? And who are these people they are hiring? Anang Mittal, has this been raised in the past? Have you counted this?
Yeah, I think Professor Babonas has actually done a public service here. Although I don't know how many hearts and minds it will change in the United States or in the West in general. I think the idea of there being an agenda is certainly true. I wouldn't call it a conspiracy, but I would say there's a lot of collusion going on, and there's a lot of folks who are ideologically aligned against the BJP, and so tend to color India with a broad spectrum brush of using the language of human rights and activism, and generally what you see in corporate world as well, ESG governance, to say that India is an intolerant country, and they don't really, or most people aren't really aware of the facts, and that's kind of how it goes. I think in DC. There's a lot of the other thing that Professor Babonas said was that the real problem is with the Indians themselves, that they tend to feed into this narrative that India is becoming a more intolerant country and it's becoming sort of things are really bad over there, and that really is the issue at heart, is that a lot of Indians who are in America, in the West, tend to be indoctrinated amongst socially liberal progressive circles, and so they go along with whatever the typical narrative is that is going on, rather than standing up for themselves, standing up for their community. They most often don't even have any connection with the community. They don't hang out with Indians, and that really again sort of feeds into that. They're preaching to the elite of those countries rather than sort of reflecting the views of their home country or their own sort of country.
So, but is this so random, Sureshji, or is there an organized effort? Because Professor Babonas says that it's individuals who are being hired by these outfits, these organizations who are providing this. So what's their motivation? And the question should be asked, who are these people who they are hiring? On what basis?
Okay, so a couple of things. One is, I join Professor Sharma on recognizing the research of Professor Babones. It's actually it was very revealing. One comment that stood out to me was one of the criteria that the EIU used to consider India as one of a democratic autocracy was it was becoming a one-party rule. Now they very conveniently forget that India was a one-party rule from 1947 to 1977. More than a one-party rule, it was practically a one-family rule from 1947 to 1977. In similar ways, for example, they talk about, the Babri Masjid was being destroyed and that was a really, really bad act. Well, yes, but every country from time to time looks at its own history, rewrites it. I live in Atlanta. I see the movement to go back and re-examine the Confederate state and the kind of actions they took against, for example, African Americans in this country. And Confederate symbols are routinely torn down. They are routinely removed from courthouses and so on. Now, those are all movements that, minority communities or communities that have been wrong in the past, when they correct the past, they also remove the symbol of the past. Could the Basbari Masjid have been handled differently? History will tell. But to consider that somehow that is unique to India and nobody else does that is particularly insidious. Where is this coming from and who are the experts they are hiring? Sai Deepakji in his book addresses this issue head on. He talks about this notion of universalism, and I think it's a very powerful metaphor for understanding this. What he argues is there's a universalism that has been baked into it, which says every country should conform to this universal set of values and ethics and morals and et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, they're conveniently based on Western European morality and universality. And because of that, any town, any nation, in this particular case, Modi's India, stands up and says, you know what, we're going to do things a little differently. We have a strong culture behind us. We're going to use that culture. We're going to pick values from that culture, and we're going to use that to solve current problems. Somehow, there are people in the West, and particularly in America, who just don't like that. They don't like somebody getting off the reservation, if you will, right? And I think that's a very powerful argument. If you notice the academics who sign on to this, and I will straight off the bat, I can think of a couple of academics who do this. They sign on to this universalist agenda. They want everybody to be the same. And we just reject that. I mean, Jaishankarji has made that point again and again, and he's made it very, very clearly, saying that, we are not, we don't take an American position or a Chinese position, we take an Indian position. No. America, we do it all the time. We take an American position, we don't necessarily take a European position.
There is this whole aspect of the America worldview and the India worldview. But those people now, what Professor Babones, Pandit Satish Sharma says, that the people who are authoring this are those who have an international presence or who are aware, who are present at Harvard, Stanford and these places at very high. They're part of the intelligentsia with Indian roots, and they are the ones who are hired. So when they write something, these organizations are in their place to believe that, okay, in good faith, what they're writing is genuine, and this is their reflection of the country that they belong to. So then we need to identify who are these people, and then expose them if they are the ones who are pursuing an agenda which is going to hurt us as a nation of 1.4 billion people. Panditji.
Anandji, I appreciate what you're saying, but I think we have an even better opportunity. We don't need to undermine or identify the foot soldiers, because the work that Professor Babones does actually justifies, as an independent observer with no iron in the fire and no interest, that in fact the complete work, the mission of these entities, that's all been undermined. And if you have a look at their last report, there is almost an air of petulance about it, an air of sort of tantrum about it. And when I was contemplating this, it occurred to me that the increasingly self-confident democracy of Bharat is actually now saying we don't need the interference from extra state actors. And these extra state actors, like these institutions who produce these reports, what I think they're experiencing is almost withdrawal symptoms. They're so used to being able to interfere and toss verbal and intellectual and academic hand grenades into the functioning of India. And now all of a sudden, those hand grenades are just bouncing back off as India says, no, thank you very much. We have democratic mandates. We're making incredible economic progress. we really don't need you involved in our affairs anymore. And if we do, we'll reach out to you. And they're struggling to accept this new reality. If you have a look at the actual report itself, what Professor Babonis has said, the first statistic, which showed India in a particular position, was equally unfounded and unreliable as the second report, which shows the loss. You see, what they're trying to do is to demonstrate a decrease, a decline, that something is going wrong in India. And if the original parameter and the secondary parameter, both of them, are actually completely unreliable, the decline is also of no value whatsoever. And I think the whole kit and caboodle should be rejected out of hand as being completely very, very poor science.
No, absolutely. And the other aspect is, just because you belong to India does not give you, and you're at a high-profile place, or you're perceived to be intelligentsia, does not give you the right to say and do what you want to say and do. But more importantly, you need to be an Indian citizen. If you've given up your Indian passport and citizenship, then don't claim Indian roots. That perhaps should be the underlying bedrock. And more people need to come out and counter these facts and fact check if there is misinformation that's being sent out. Thank you very much to all our panelists. Winding up this edition of The Right Stand on that note. Zakar Reddy with Brass Tacks.